Hey, what's up everyone? My name is Jeremy and today I want to cover the story of how I came down with an undiagnosed chronic illness. For those of you who are going through a chronic illness, you'll probably identify a lot of parallels with your own journey. For those of you who don't have a chronic illness, this will shed insight as to the experiences and sufferings a lot of chronic illness sufferers have gone through, as well as the thought process and symptoms that we dealt with. And this is just another video also to just introduce what I've gone through, what I'm going through, as well as document my journey. Let's dive a little bit into my background. Up until a year and a half ago, I was a healthy person. I didn't have any major health issues. It wasn't like I was ever chronically ill as a kid. In fact, as a kid and young adult, my immune system and my health was very good. I was the type of person that would go to the doctor once a year, everything was good, nothing to worry about. In August of 2020, my life changed completely. But let's backtrack a little bit. A few months prior to that, around May, I would say, I started having a lot of skin issues. I started getting a lot of mystery skin rashes, a lot of hives. Basically, skin stuff was my main issue. Now, it was not too bad, but then it started getting to the point where I would be itching all the time. I would itch and scratch myself because I was so itchy during the nighttime, to the point that I was very bloodied from scratching myself because I was so itchy. And the other thing that I dealt with was inflamed hair follicles, which kind of resembles acne well, not always, but generally speaking, that's kind of what it resembled. So naturally, I went to a dermatologist and I was prescribed Bactrim, which is an antibiotic. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but this antibiotic was a super high dose. So I started taking the antibiotic, and over time, like, a lot of the skin stuff went down, especially the inflamed hair follicles. So it seems like it was working, right? However, around, I would say, 2 weeks taking this antibiotic, I started breaking out into this full body rash. And it wasn't pretty. Like, literally, it felt like the blood vessels, or actually it looked like the blood vessels underneath my body were like bursting. I don't know if that was actually what was happening, but that's what it kind of looked like. And then I started getting a fever. Now, keep in mind, this was around, I would say, July, end of June 2020. So this is a few months into the pandemic. And I thought, do I have COVID? I was thinking, okay, I need to get a COVID test. So I took a COVID test, I had that fever, and I was negative, so I didn't have COVID. And after 2 weeks, the fever broke, and I felt good for around 2 weeks. I actually felt really good mentally. I felt like my mind was going back to normal because, as most people know, when you have a fever, you tend to have brain fog. I started developing warts on my hands, which were very annoying to deal with. And the other thing that started happening was I started getting these really sharp ice pick like pains in my head. It just felt like someone was stabbing me with an ice pick or a needle. So I felt that was a little bit unusual because, in general, I'm not the type of person to really have headaches unless I eat a lot of sugar. And I just never experienced anything like that before. So what exactly happened? Well, I woke up and just everything was messed up. My face was numb. I felt like my eyes weren't focused. I felt like my sense of balance was gone. I just felt, it was so weird because my face was numb. I felt like my mental processes were not functioning. I was trying to do work and I could barely even work because mentally I was so gone. I had really bad memory. I would try to speak, and then as I was speaking a long sentence, I would forget what I was trying to say. I had a lot of issues with word finding, so basically, like, I was trying to form a sentence and I'm like, what was that word I should have used? And for most normal people, when you're talking, you don't really consciously think of what you're saying. So all this, like, really terrified me. And there were so many other symptoms. Like, I just felt like a shell of who I was. A lot of the symptoms were neurological, to the point that I really felt like, is there something terribly wrong with me? Did I get some sort of like hidden infection that just messed me up? Other symptoms I had included just like this feeling of when I was lying down, depending on my head positioning, it felt like I would be blacking out. And there was other stuff where I literally couldn't stare at the screen, because every time I'd stare at a screen, whether it was a phone, whether it was a tablet or the computer screen, it literally felt like my eyes were rolling in the back of my head and I was blacking out. It was the weirdest and the most scary thing ever, because it just felt like my entire body was going crazy on myself, and especially my nervous system. And I just didn't really know how to deal with it. So now I'm going to dive into the full list of symptoms. I'm not going to read every single one because literally I feel like it would take 5 minutes. I had probably hundreds of symptoms at a point. but I'll give you the general gist of it. So the first bucket we're going to go into, and I'm just going to use my tablet because too much of it, I can't remember a lot of things, and especially when I'm trying to record a video, trying to memorize all of it, it's too much work for me. So let's start with neurological. I started having headaches, so the ice pick type of headaches I had a lot of times. The other thing that was really, really irritating was the constant head and eye pressure. I felt like my head was going to explode. And to this day, although it's gotten better, whenever I'm upright, not meaning I'm not lying down, I constantly have this head pressure and tightness around my jaws and around my head and neck area. So that was really aggravating because can you imagine dealing with the feeling like your head's about to explode for months? Not just like, oh, I had one day of it, but for months. I had a lot of dizziness and vertigo. I had a lot of numbness and buzzing around my face and scalp, especially my left side, which is very odd. A lot of cognitive issues, which I already went over. I had a lot of coordination issues, especially with fine motor movements. For me, I actually felt like I was developing like Parkinson's and like losing my nerve function to the point that even, let's say, unscrewing a vitamin cap, I had to consciously think about it and focus on it. So, I just felt like my nerves went crazy on me overnight. I had a lot of personality changes. I felt very out of it. I felt very depersonalized. I wasn't living my life. Had a lot of anxiety, depression. I had a lot of nerve pain. My limbs would fall asleep way more easily. I had a lot of neck and back pain, stiffness. Sometimes I'd feel a jolting feeling down like my spine and neck. And by the way, this is usually a sign of a central nervous system issue. It tends to be associated with multiple sclerosis as well as transverse myelitis. I also felt like my limbs would twitch randomly. Like this eyelid right here actually kept twitching very like subtly, and it didn't go away for months. So unless you're looking at me closely, you wouldn't notice it, but it was going like crazy. There were times where I would just feel like not someone, but I felt like there were a lot of inner tremors where it felt like my body was just like vibrating, like kind of like losing its balance. And, that covers most of the neurological stuff, not all of it, but the majority of it. I also had a lot of eye issues. A lot of weird stuff started happening with my eyes. A lot of visual disturbances. I felt like my peripheral vision was starting to decrease. And also, I just felt like my eyes weren't as focused, and I started seeing a lot more floaters. And it just felt like my eyes just weren't working, which was, again, unusual because I went to the doctors quite often and they couldn't find anything wrong. I also had a lot of auditory issues as well as vestibular, and just anything related to sound, as well as my ear, nose, and throat. I had constant tinnitus in my ears, so just the buzzing sound. There were times that actually felt like it was pulsatile tinnitus, which is, it would beat, I don't know if it was beating with my heartbeat, but it would feel like a thumping noise. Sound was very distorted. Basically, we're kind of like bats in the sense that, when you hear a sound, if you're healthy, you can, generally speaking, kind of figure out what direction it's coming from. For me, it felt like I was in a cave filled with echoes to the point I'm just like, I have no idea where that sound is coming from. So when I would go to the doctor, oftentimes they would call my name and it felt like I was in a cave and they were far away. So I felt a lot of also sinus pressure and pain and other stuff going on. There were times where my joints would hurt a lot to the point I thought I was developing arthritis, but every time I ran a test for it, came back negative. And there was a point actually where my left foot became swollen. I thought I had gout. Ran a test for it, was negative, but that thing was debilitating to the point that I couldn't put any pressure on it, and my foot was swollen for around an entire month. So again, we didn't know what the cause was, but I was really suffering. Had a lot of skin issues, which I already went over, but I think one of the biggest things that happened is I had multiple like chemical and skin sensitivity. So like everything and anything would trigger all these rashes on my skin. So even if I was, let's say, cleaning my table and then I was using gloves because maybe the cleaning agent is like a Clorox wipe, after I would take off the glove, my entire hand would be completely red as if it were burned with chemicals. So everything and anything would trigger it. I literally had to track every single type of cleaning product I was using, whether it was for a substance, whether it was a personal hygiene product or everything. I literally tracked all of it to see if it was causing any reaction. And I couldn't find any pattern because honestly, everything was just setting me off. So that was very, very confusing and very, very miserable because keep in mind, I was dealing with all the other hundreds of symptoms. Now I want to talk about what it was like getting help. I used to be with Kaiser, and quite honestly, they didn't take me seriously. Their health record had me always as a healthy individual, so when the visits started spiking, they were thinking he's probably just anxious. There were times I was described as having acute stress disorder, having COVID anxiety, because oh my goodness, the pandemic affected me that much, I guess. But they just didn't take me seriously, and it was a very, very frustrating experience. There was actually a point where I had like a very severe panic attack and I went to the urgent care. And keep in mind, this panic attack was triggered by drinking a latte, which is not, it's not even a fully caffeinated drink. And then the doctor at the urgent care literally said, you've had like 20 visits in the past 2 months. Like, have you considered, the psychological component behind these symptoms? And he was basically saying that I was just being too anxious and probably being a hypochondriac. Now, I do want to say, in the days leading up to getting an MRI, or the weeks leading up to it, I was in a state of complete and utter fear, panic, and terror. I was thinking, what if it turns out I actually have like a tumor in my brain? What if it turns out that they do a scan and they say, wow, there's something wrong with you and the prognosis is not good? So for me, the possibility of having to find out that I had something terminal weighed on me for the weeks up to getting the MRI scan. For those of you who have never dealt with something like this, you will never know the utter terror I was feeling. And people that are dealing with illnesses like that have faced. And that's okay. Like, I just want to illustrate it was not pretty. And for those of you who have gone through stuff like I've gone through, you know what I mean by the fact that it's terror. It's not fear, it's utter terror. The possibility that your life is being cut short. I don't know how I could even ever put that into words, the feeling I was feeling. And I do want to say this is a time where I started reaching out to my ex-girlfriends. Not that we ever left on bad terms, but I just really wanted to like set things right, or just like catch up and say like, hey, I'm going through some stuff, but I want to really express my appreciation towards you. And I started writing letters to my loved ones because in the case I was going to pass, I wanted to be able to give my thoughts and pass it on to the people that matter the most to me. Thankfully, I didn't have brain tumors, so that was very, very relieving to hear. And I just started going on this journey of seeing multiple doctors. Some doctors weren't very helpful. They just thought I had anxiety. Other doctors ran some tests and thought I had like a post-viral syndrome, similar to, long COVID. But their treatment plan was you don't need to do anything, just wait and recover. I also ran a lot of lab tests, just to see what was going on with me. The lab tests also included STD tests as well as tests for Lyme disease and all this other stuff. And it got to the point where I ran so many blood tests that the veins in my right arm got scarred up. And there was a point where actually when people try to draw blood, they weren't able to draw blood out of my right arm. So that wasn't very pleasant, getting poked and not having any blood come out. In this journey, I came across some functional doctors that were osteopaths, but they focused on, very mystery chronic illnesses. And a lot of times, these types of doctors will treat mold, Lyme, heavy metals, and also toxin poisoning. So we ran a lot of tests there. And sometimes some toxins or some of these markers would come back as slightly abnormal, but there was never anything really alarming. So at best, I was kind of prescribed certain types of things to detox my body, but did it help? Maybe, but it's very hard to say. However, I also did do a herbal program that was actually, I feel, very, very, very helpful because it addressed healing the body in different distinct stages, such as healing your immune system, your circulatory system, and all this other stuff. In September 2021, when I was in Morocco, when I landed, I felt kind of run down from traveling, but I didn't really feel that horrible. And what started happening is I started to just kind of feel sick. Just kind of like feeling under the weather, like I was about to get sick. Things weren't feeling good in my body. I felt like my body temperature was fluctuating. And then the biggest thing that started happening is I started feeling a lot of numbness and tingling in my limbs. I felt that was very odd because the only time I really had felt numbness and tingling is if I was sitting on my leg or body part and it was cutting out the circulation. So that was really odd. And as time went on, those symptoms did not go away. So I actually started to become very concerned because there's a point where, unless I was wearing shoes, it felt like I couldn't really feel my legs. I mean, there was still some sensation, but it just felt like it was asleep or just waking up from falling asleep. And then I eventually left Morocco. Then I came back to the US and the doctors started to consider diseases like multiple sclerosis. So I ran like the nerve studies, I ran the MRIs, and at this point in time, today's date is January 3rd, 2022. Gotta love US healthcare, how long it takes to run tests. I am due for a spinal tap and lumbar puncture, which is where they insert a needle into your spine and withdraw the fluid to really analyze it to see if it has any like viral infections, bacterial infections, fungal infections, or any evidence of different diseases. That's where I'm at right now, but I just felt really, really horrible because I felt I was really over the hump. It took me, again, 9 months to really get to a point where I could travel again, and then it just felt like I got punted back to like square one. And you know, to this day, my legs are still largely numb and stiff, and sometimes different parts of my body also feel numb and stiff. I would say, going back to my experience with the MRI, this is also where I have not been in the best emotional headspace, because even though like my scans are largely coming back as normal with the MRIs and the nerve studies, there are some slight abnormalities, but nothing that's really like worrisome, I would say, according to the neurologist. But there's a part of me where I feel like, well, if I don't have multiple sclerosis, or if it's unlikely I have that, what if I have another disease that mimics multiple sclerosis, like neuromyelitis optica? And some of these autoimmune diseases have even worse prognosis than multiple sclerosis. For example, with Devic's disease or neuromyelitis optica, I remember reading a stat that said like 50% of people with this disease will become blind and or paralyzed within 5 years. And you know, like, I understand that there is a balance where, you know, as patients, we don't want to look too much into the disease and the different diagnoses, because it can really cause a lot of emotional suffering. But for me, you know, since I'm always trying to figure out what's going on, and I felt I had to be my own advocate, like reading all these stats and knowing all these diseases exist and the prognosis, it really has honestly been very like terrifying and scary. So I'm still working through it. I feel like it's gone on for so many months at this point in time that it still scares me, but I'm also kind of tired of being scared, so it's not as bad, but I'm still worried, and it's still not a pleasant experience. So there you have it, my story of coming down with an undiagnosed chronic illness that no doctors as of this moment have been able to figure out. Now, please like this video if it resonates with you, or if you want to show some support. Please subscribe if you're curious to hear more about my journey, my stories, my lessons, and everything that I've learned on this health journey I've gone through and am going through. And please comment if you are going through something similar, or if you just want to leave any notes of encouragement or anything else you want to leave. I really appreciate it all, and I'll see you in the next video.